Following the September 11th attacks, Gunnery Sergeant John A. Dailey was one of the Force Recon Marines who entered the fight in a new special operations unit that would become MarSoc. As one of the leaders tasked with selecting men for this elite unit, he was looking for, quote, tough, rugged bastards with strong backs and hard feet. He writes about his experience in his new book, Tough, Rugged Bastards, a memoir of life in Marine Special Operations. After over 20 years in the Marine Corps, John received his MFA in creative writing from UNCW. These days, he keeps his back strong and his feet hard as an avid Rucker and GoRuck Cadre. He writes about rucking on his Substack, Ruck the Fuck Up, RTFU, and talks about the sport and the mental side of it in his Ruck Rants, helping readers from all walks of life crush their goals in the field and in life. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. I'm excited to be here.
And you were saying that we needed to start with a little disclaimer, and I wanted to put a question to you. How does a person who has worked in an area where you have top secret clearance, etc., then go on to write in a way where you're not going to get into trouble or what have you?
It's challenging, but I'll start off with a disclaimer that all of my opinions, everything I say is my own, right? I'm not speaking on behalf of the Marine Corps Special Operations or the United States Special Operations Command. It's a little daunting because for more than 20 years of my life, I was raised to be a silent professional, and we kind of make fun sometimes of people that don't follow that mantra. But I feel like enough time has passed. As most of the events I'm writing about are more than 20 years in the past. I kind of felt the calling to write. It's hopefully, I feel that the stories that we have and, we could share with young Marines, with civilians to help them better understand what the military does for them, what it takes to be a member of a special operations unit, and hopefully either help some young person who's thinking of joining the military make that decision and prepare if they're interested in a life in special operations.
And I have some questions about all of that and about your book and your decision to tell those stories. But I kind of want to work backwards and start with your hobby where you and I got connected through social media, and that is rucking. Can you maybe tell people what that is and some of the health benefits? This is something it's probably my favorite land-based activity, but it doesn't seem like it gets the attention it deserves.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that it does. And it's something anybody who's been in the military for any length of time has gone on a ruck. They may call it a hike, they may call it a foot march, a road march, whatever the case may be. But particularly within special operations, we refer to the pack itself as a ruck or a rucksack, and then the act of putting it on and moving, going on a ruck, so rucking. And it's something that people who've done it in the military probably didn't enjoy. The military has the tendency to kind of suck the fun out of, whether it's jumping out of airplanes or scuba diving or going on a lovely ruck through the woods. They have a tendency to suck a lot of the fun out of it. But it really has kind of come to prominence when Jason McCarthy, who was a former Army Special Operations guy, started the company GoRuck and started introducing it to people. More recently, Michael Easter wrote the book Comfort Crisis, which is a great book on the subject. And now it's starting to kind of become a little more recognized method of fitness, but all it is putting on a pack of some sort with weight in it and moving a distance, whether that's a couple of books in your JanSport that you have left over from high school and walking around the block, or whether that's doing 100-pound mile, right, to load yourself down. It's the health benefits are, really, it kind of combines the best of cardiovascular activity and weight training, because you're load bearing, and it's infinitely scalable, I think, is the beautiful thing about it for people who are trying to get into an exercise program that, it doesn't matter how much weight you put on, you can kind of, I call them the levers, right? You can kind of pull the lever of how far you go, how fast you go, how heavy you go, or like we were talking about, the elevation, if you live in a place with elevation. And one of the things, I mean, we know that moving under a load or doing weighted squats, weighted, builds bone density. It does just so much for the body. So it's a great all around activity. One of the things that, particularly for people who are trying to lose weight, one of the challenges is that once you lose 5 pounds, 10 pounds, the things that you were doing won't work anymore, right? Because now your body is expending less calories. And one of the great things about that is you throw a little more weight and you're, on your back. Now you weigh the same as you started with. So you're expending the same number of calories. And there's, once you get into it, the activity, there's a lot of other things that you can do, squats with a ruck on, use your ruck to, do overhead presses, RDLs, any sort of, so the weight in the ruck can be used as a kettlebell or a barbell or a dumbbell. So there's, like I said, particularly within the GoRuck community is events all over the place. There was just a huge group out in Normandy for the 80th anniversary of the landings there. So there, you can look them up online and find an event or find even events that you don't have to pay for. They're just groups, local groups that get together and ruck once a week on Saturdays. So it's a great community. It's, every one that I participated in, it's incredibly inclusive. People, that's the first time they've had a ruck on. They come out and people want to see you do well, want to see you improve, want to help you out. So there's a Facebook community, Instagram. There's a lot of places you can go for advice. And GoRuck makes great gear, and they sell a lot of great gear. But the beauty of it is that you can start with, like I said, with anything that you have. I mean, pick up your kid and carry them, right? If that's what you got, some books, bricks, rocks, it doesn't really matter.
And really anywhere. I mean, you just walk around the block. If you're, traveling and you're in an airport and you already have a pack on, you could just walk around the airport. One thing, it's so funny what you say about like the military sucking the fun out of things. I mean, my experience with rucking is purely as a civilian health activity. Is there anyone you served with or who was in the military who takes a look at your rucking hobby and is like, why on earth would you do that if you don't have to anymore?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that quite a bit. I still work with Marines, special operations guys, and I like it because it still lets me get out and kind of compete with them or at least participate with them. But yeah, a lot of the other military friends I have, when they see me throwing on a ruck and taking off on a Saturday morning while they're mowing the lawn, they're like, why are you doing that? Is somebody making you do this?
When I was a kid, I think it was like, in that age where you go and you like camp in the backyard or something, and you're not on like a real trip, but you're sleeping outside. I remember my brother and I like set up a tent, and we asked my dad, like, if he wanted to, the Marine Corps dad, like if he wants to camp with us. And he's like, no, thanks. Like, I used to do that professionally. I'm retired now. No, never again.
Yeah, it's taken it takes people who served in the military for any length of time, quite often some time to get back into camping or get back into some activities because they do. I mean, ruck in the military usually involves hundreds potentially of your closest friends moving at a very precise pace, carrying a whole lot of equipment. I'm getting yelled at, if you're not keeping up. Kind of mandated stops every so often. You got to change your feet, got to powder your, change your socks, put powder on your feet. So it's very directed, very, there's a huge difference when you can decide that, hey, I'm going to go as far as I want to go. I'm going to go where I want to go. If I want to stop by the 7-Eleven, or the convenience store and get a soda pop or a candy bar, I can do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, it seems to me that, and there must be a huge difference in the intention, right? Where, say, on a selection course, where they're trying to like weed people out based on who can't keep up, who can't carry the weight, versus a civilian, whether it's a GoRuck event or just like when I'll finish work and put a pack on and just do a little bit of hiking for some cardio. Those seem like while there are similarities, they seem to be almost like, on the one hand, who cares about your knees? On the other hand, you're probably trying to take care of your knees.
Yeah, it's in some cases, I think it's like the difference between being on a pickup game of baseball in your neighborhood on the 4th of July, being a pro player. There's that's part of the beauty of it. Doing it on your own is you set the pace, you set the goals, and most of it depends on the GoRuck event. There are some that are intended as challenges that, not everybody will complete, but most of them are, the intention is that, hey, we're going to go at the pace of the slowest person. We're going to, it's a little bit of leadership building as well. Hey, everybody's responsible for your buddy. And that's one of I think the great things about it was just the idea that it's, in addition to doing some good physical, fitness, some hard physical fitness, it kind of helps instill some leadership traits and good life skills into the rucker.
And do you find when you're doing those things as now recreationally rucking that connects you with aspects of the Marine Corps that you really enjoyed or kind of shaped you as a person?
Absolutely. Really think that my first real memory of rucking in the Marine Corps was during boot camp. And you go through a lot of Marine Corps boot camp before you get to the point where you throw a pack on and go. That was, I was a fit, 17-year-old when I joined, coming off of wrestling and running track and cross country thing, endurance. I was there, but the first real ruck that we went out on was, maybe 10 miles. And I just remember, somebody saying we were at 5 miles, and I'm like, man, I don't know that I'm going to make it. I mean, my feet hurt, my lower back hurts, my shoulder hurts, everything hurts. And the idea that we've got to go as far again as we've already gone, blisters and everything. But, once you complete something like that, then you started to dig, or a reservoir of mental toughness. I talk about a lot, and now, the next time you go back to it, you're like, hey, there's water here. I'm not dry. That kind of flipped the switch in my head that I'm like, hey, if you can do hard things, then you can make hard things easy,
And that was actually my next question. I wanted to ask you about mental toughness because, like my main thing is expedition sea kayaking. And I just absolutely love it. I love navigating. I like the self-reliance of it, and a lot of very similar skills to what you're describing. There's an element of leadership if you're doing it in a group. And I have found that is an activity that is probably 80-90% mental. And the example I always give is like, it's not really about fitness when you have to put on wet thermals that you were wearing yesterday, when you get out of a warm sleeping bag in the morning and you have to change into wet clothes. And that has a very clarifying effect about whether you really want to be out there or not. And I kind of love that. And I was doing a trip last year, and I was sharing videos from the trip and updates. And a friend of mine who was on this podcast, Josh, who was in the military and deployed, he was like, don't take this the wrong way, but like, you don't look like a tough guy, like just at first glance. And he's like, I really liked watching your videos because he said it reminded him of how in the military he would see someone totally transform or really like rise to the occasion. And it didn't have anything to do with what the person looked like, or I thought that was, I don't know. I just find that subject of mental toughness so fascinating. And it's it's interesting to experience and to see in others. There's a question in there somewhere. Like how would you define mental toughness, and how can that be trained just like anything else? Like I don't know, like I'm tougher than I used to be before that trip because of things that went wrong and because of the hardship that I leaned into. But it seems like that can take many forms.
Absolutely. And I think that the best analogy that I've come to is that every time you do something harder than you've done before, it's like you're showing up at a well, this reservoir of toughness, and you're like, hey, there's nothing here. There's no more water. What am I going to do? I can quit, or I can dig it deeper. And when you do dig it deeper, the next time you come to it, there's more water there. It's like the second hike that we did in boot camp was longer than the first, but it wasn't twice as hard. It was probably twice as long, but not twice as hard, because I had already dug a well. And I'm a huge believer. I joined the military, like I said, at 17 years old. I'm 5'7" at the time. I was probably about 130 pounds. And not a, fit, but not a monster by any means. I'm still 5'7", a little bit more than 135 pounds now, quite a bit more. I realized early on that if I was going to be successful, it wasn't going to be because of how strong I was or how fast necessarily I was. It was going to be because I would keep going after other people quit. And I don't know how I kind of had the clarity of thought at that young age that, hey, I can work harder. And if I work harder, it'll make working hard easier every time I come back to it. So that really just kind of became my mantra, throughout my time in the military. Each time I would try out to get into a special operations unit or a different unit or a more advanced unit, I was probably not the guy that people would look at and say, yeah, oh, yeah, he's a shoo-in, but I wanted to be the guy who would, make them at the end of whatever it was, whatever the challenge was or test was, be like, damn, that guy's still here. He's tougher than we thought. So it really became a obsession with me, and I spent a lot of time becoming very interested in the idea. How does this work? How do we build mental toughness? How does it run out? How do we create more of it? And, does mental toughness built in one scenario translate, which I think it does. I mean, I think largely, it translates across the board. And then the kind of the other aspect of it is that one of the things in military special operations selection events are rucking. We do a lot of it. And usually it's individually paced. So you're just told, hey, go. You may not be told how far it is. You may not be told how long you have to do it, how much water you have, or where there'll be more water. You just go. That requires, obviously it draws on your mental toughness. It draws on your determination, your reason for being there, all these things. But it's indisputable that the person who's in really, really good shape, they don't have to draw on their mental toughness as much or as soon. So, the fitter you get or the more accustomed or, indoctrinated to a certain type of difficulty. Like I would have a tough time going out on a sea kayaking. I've always had a tough time putting on wet clothes the next morning. One of my most hated things was, putting on a wetsuit, wake up, getting ready to swim back out in the ocean to the submarine that's waiting or whatever the case is. Hate that, full of sand. But, you do it because you got to do it. You do it in the military, a big driving factor is because you don't want to let the team down. You don't want the team to look at you and say, hey, you're the weak link. But that's one of the factors when you get out. Now if I'm being honest, I do, young guys being like, hey man, that old guy's, he's keeping up. He's still pretty tough. I drive a certain amount of satisfaction for that, but it's primarily this internal, that doesn't mean anything to them. It's what do I get out of it? And I don't have to necessarily do anything hard anymore that I don't want to, but, I don't want to not want to. I want to challenge myself. I think at a certain point, when you stop doing that, you start degrading. Your well starts drying up and it becomes tougher to redig it, the older you get.
I think that for folks listening at home, because I would imagine there's a whole range from people who already are out having adventures and doing different sports or whatever, and then maybe people would like to do fitness. And you'd mentioned kind of the inclusivity of rucking. And I think a big misconception when people hear words like strength and toughness is we are not talking about some of us are standing on some hilltop of badassery saying I'm strong and you're not. And when I think about people in my life who are stronger than me, tougher than me, who have helped me along the way, they're always like trying to bring other people up with them and teach and mentor. And it's very rare that you'll encounter someone who's like, I'm better than you because I can run faster or whatever. Right? A lot of what you're describing is, especially in the civilian world, is more approachable than people might assume.
Absolutely. And one of the beautiful things about it is that, we could go out on a ruck, you might have 50 pounds, I might have 5. That 5 pounds may feel like 50 to me, but, we can move at the same pace, or we can go out for, 45 minutes together and then, I can keep going, while you go, stop. There's, the opportunity to train with other people, they're with other people that are of varying levels, with other people that can teach you things. And then that's been my experience as well. When I first, the military sometimes can be a little, particularly they're very competitive. So yeah. And, I'm a competitive person, but when I first got out of the Marine Corps, I started running ultra marathons, and I had never really liked to run when I was in the Marine Corps, but it was something we did. And I started doing that because I had kind of left the military. I wasn't being required to do hard stuff anymore. So I was like, hey, I'm going to, find something hard to do. And it's, seemed really cool. So, hey, let's go run 100 miles. So I took those on, and it was the same experience there. Everybody that I met was very incredibly helpful, gave me really good advice. Everybody was willing to slow down to help you or teach you something or show you something or share food with you or whatever the case was. And that, I think translates to the same into rucking. Absolutely.
One thing that I find, I want to talk about your book and a little more about your career. And I love the title. And I was so interested to find out that was that official language that you were told to find, quote, tough, rugged bastards?
Yes. Well, I mean, official as in that is what, so kind of have to give a wee bit of truncated history lessons. In the U.S. military, started the Special Operations Command in 1987. And it happened because of a failed hostage rescue attempt when we had hostages in Iran. So when the U.S. Special Operations Command was formed, the Army sent the Green Berets and the Rangers, the Navy sent the SEALs, the Air Force sent their Special Operations folks. The Marine Corps declined the offer to send Force Recon Marines. So, that was about the time I joined the Marine Corps. A couple of years later, I got the Force Recon, and we kind of always bemoaned the fact that, hey, we're not in special operations, so we're not getting as high-profile missions or as much money or as good of new of equipment, that sort of thing. So after 9/11, the Marine Corps was finally told, hey, you are going to do this. You're going to provide an organization to special operations. To kind of figure that out, there was a small test unit that was formed called Detachment 1. It was total of about 100 people ultimately, but there were about 30 of what we call the operators or the shooters. And I was picked to be one of the 4 team leaders within that. And the boss was a colonel that I had worked for quite a few years, knew him, kind of a legend in our community. And when he brought me in, he's like, hey, you know what I expect from you. I had the nickname Ranger, right? So Ranger, you know what I expect from you? I'm like, yes, sir, excellence. And he's like, right, you're free to pick your team, pick the guys that you want. But you know what I'm looking for? I want tough, rugged bastards with strong backs and hard feet. And when he said that, and it wasn't the first time he had said it, it was a known phrase. But when he said it that time, I was like, it kind of clicked in the back of my head. And I had always had aspirations to write. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to tuck that away because that would be a hell of a book title.
Yeah, I'll say. And I have another kind of context question, but one thing that I find endlessly fascinating is the self-deprecating and like foul-mouthed humor of Marines. And when I was working on my dad's book, we had fun finding he had always said USMC stands for Useless Sons Made Comfortable. And we found that, I guess, in his generation was one of them, but I've since heard Uncle Sam's Misguided Children.
Yeah, that's the one I've heard more frequently.
Being a bastard might be a bad thing in polite society or what have you. But there seems to be like a perverse delight in adversity, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the mental toughness certainly stems from that. The Marine Corps has always prided itself on that. I mean, we're the smallest service by far. We always, say that, hey, we do more with less. We get, even today, the Marine Corps Special Operations Command is about, I think we're like 3% make up 3% of U.S. SOCOM, but we do like 10% of the missions. And so we've always taken a bitch and we moan about it all the time. And, one of the other things in the Marine Corps that if a Marine isn't complaining, then they're not happy. We take a perverse pleasure in our ability to bitch and moan about, the fact that we're getting screwed over, or you're getting the short end of the stick, or we have to do, we wouldn't have to do this if we were in the Army, or if we were, the Air Force chow halls are like, 5-star dining establishments compared to what we eat. So we kind of make a habit, I guess, or a hobby out of criticizing ourselves. But any Marine will jump to the aid of any other if somebody else tries to criticize them or talk shit about the Marine Corps. So we're allowed, just having a little brother, right? I mean, we're allowed to talk about them and mess with them, but we don't don't tolerate when other people do.
Yeah, or anyone who I guess would be foolish enough to, I suppose. I mean that part just growing up, seeing the way my dad would connect with like total strangers, where that's the only thing they have in common is that they're both Marines. Or it was
Yeah, I mean, and it's
really
an absolute brotherhood now. It's a fraternity, I guess sisterhood as well. Right now that we've got, or I guess we've had, females in the Marine Corps for a long time, but I think all of the doors have now been open where they can largely do anything. But yeah, you find out it's funny that a lot of times we will bitch and moan about the Marine Corps, particularly at the younger ranks. But when you get out of the Marine Corps, then instantly you see the same person who was complaining the day before with a Marine Corps hat on, a Marine Corps shirt. They got stickers slapped on their car. They're at the VFW talking about this or that. You see somebody else with and I've encountered absolute strangers, with a old tattoo or with something on their bag that they're carrying, and it turns into a camaraderie and a friendship that is far belies the amount of time spent together.
powerful. And one context question, because I have a international audience. My friend who was on here, who's a Green Beret, I asked him to sort of explain what that is. What is Force Recon, and how is that different from the rest of the Marine Corps?
So Force Recon is a small, very small. I mean, there's a couple of hundred really at any given time of Marines, and their job is to operate behind enemy lines to answer questions that our bosses would have. Where locate the enemy, where's the enemy, what are his capabilities. We might go in and blow stuff up. We might parachute in and just take photos. We might scuba dive in to a harbor and plant mines. There's really were every country has some sort of equivalent, whether you're talking similar to the SAS or you're talking similar to the GIGN, depending on where you are.
Sure. And I think rucking in Britain, I think they call it like yomping.
Yomping, yeah. First time I heard that, we had a person who'd become a good friend of mine that had come back from an exchange a tour with the Brits. And yeah, he's like, hey, let's go for a yomp. I'm like, a yomp? They also call it, which I always find interesting, what people call their pack. So like I said, generally in the military, they call it a pack. So if you're in special operations, it seems the term is where the term ruck came from, and that kind of comes from the term rucksack. But the Brits call or at least the commandos, the ruck a Bergen, and the Bergen comes from Bergen, Finland, or Norway. I'm sorry, Bergen, the town of Bergen, Norway, where they're like the initial rucks that they purchased were made. It's really, and it's cool. I was in Bergen. It was a very quick stop, but I was there last week or the week before. So I looked around. I was trying to find like a ruck store, but
Was there anything Bergen related in Bergen that you found?
no, not that I saw. So I was a little disappointed.
To briefly just summarize for the listener, you and I were talking before this, and you had mentioned you joined the Marine Corps in 1987, and
Yes.
through the 90s, you experienced essentially a peacetime service. And then one Tuesday morning, that changed in a matter of by the end of that, an hour or whatever. Where were you on September 11th?
Well, it was Tuesday night for me because I was sitting in a bar in Darwin, Australia, an Irish pub, of course, because there's an Irish pub everywhere. And we had just left and sailed from the States to Australia. We had stopped there to do some training. We were leaving on a 6-month routine deployment for training. And it was the first night that we had any time off. So I was a platoon sergeant for a Force Recon platoon, and I had a couple of team leaders. I took them out, said, hey, let's go grab a beer. And we were sitting there drinking our beer, soccer games on television, and then it switched to the tower in flames. And it took a while, obviously, to kind of figure out what we were seeing, what it meant. But very quickly, people came running in the doors, running down the streets, yelling, hey, get back to the boats, back to the boats. And so my experience was a lot different than almost everybody, who was in America, probably, other places around the globe. We were kind of sequestered. We didn't get a lot of information, but the thing that we absolutely knew was that we were the people. We were there. We were going to war. So, as soon as we got back on the boat, we sailed, and we're in Pakistan in October, and then in Afghanistan in November. And so, I had gone from, at this point, I think 13, 14 years of service and had, never heard a shot fired in anger, really, or at least not one fired at me, to the, having the understanding that, hey, I'm now sitting on in the middle of the desert in Afghanistan, and we're going out to look for the Taliban. Things happen very, very quickly. Everything relates back to mental toughness and preparation. And, I've told people when I looked up and saw that on the TV screen, the tower, I'm sure there were most people in the pub, most of the other Marines were like thinking about their family, thinking about the people they knew in New York, thinking about this or that. The first thought in my head was really three: did I do enough? Have I done my job? Are my guys ready? And, what is there anything else? And at that point, you're going to go to war with the people that you have, the training that you have, the stuff, the equipment that you have, right? You can't, there's no time at that point. So, that's been something that, luckily I was kind of raised, by my, mentors in that way, that, you train really, really hard so that war becomes easy. And, think to a man, the guys that I was responsible for, would tell you that, we had some adventures, we had some gunfights, but at the end of the day, other than getting shot at, it was a lot easier than training, right? And that's kind of the one of the, I think the writer Thucydides said that talking about the Spartans, that their drills were bloodless battles and their battles were bloody drills, right? So they had trained so hard to do the thing, and that really is instills, spending time in training, instilling mental toughness, digging the well of training, the well of toughness, the well of resilience, so that when you have to go to it, there's always going to be something there.
And again, that seems to be a lesson that applies broadly, even though most of us are never going to find ourselves on a battlefield. We'll have something where you might need that well.
Yeah. And if it's, people might argue with me, but I'm a huge believer that it transcends, it's not just a physical well, right? If, everybody's going to have some, emotional trauma, right? You're going to lose a parent, you're going to lose a friend, when that happens and that you've been through hard things before, kind of intuitively understand that, hey, I will get through this thing. It's really hard. It really sucks. It's really bad. And I've never experienced it before, but I have done really, really hard things, and I have, come out on the other side. And I think that's why, I mean, suicide in the military and the veteran community is a big problem, obviously, but I do think as a subset of the culture, generally speaking, they're more resilient. And it's largely because, hey, I've put up with a lot of things, and as bad as it seems, every single time the sun comes up, eventually, every single time we stop rucking, eventually, every single time the people stop shooting at me. All right. If I can get through those things, then I could probably get through this thing too.
I mean, it's like the videos you posted. I find this is very motivating. I think I'm going to have to go for a run after this, or a ruck. But I want to talk about the writing, but I have one more question about like your initiation into this culture of mental toughness. And you experienced two really important initiations. One of them was turned you, the 17-year-old civilian, into a Marine. And then you, I guess, would have had a selection course and additional training to become a part of Force Recon. Which was harder? Had the boot camp prepared you for and selection was finishing school, or was that a totally different beast?
It's a little bit of a different beast. I think for me, I was physically prepared for boot camp. I think I knew that I was going in the Marine Corps by the time I started high school. My initial decision, the first time I told my parents I was going to join the Marine Corps, was when I was like 7 years old. Even though I also told them I was going to be an astronaut and a truck driver and lots of other things, a shortstop for the Yankees. I kept always kind of coming back to the Marine Corps, and I spent a lot of time preparing, both physically, mentally, just under trying to learn as much as I could. So I felt that boot camp is hard. Absolutely. Boot camp is, you're really, I kind of look at it like the ship of Odysseus, right? You kind of show up and you kind of get rebuilt like plank by plank until the person that graduates, is not the person that started. You kind of do become a man. But boot camp is, if you have the kind of wherewithal to look at it as, I mean, it's a game. And that's one of the things I learned early on there is if you can kind of view it as a game, then you can kind of figure out how to play the game. Sometimes the drill instructor screaming at you, absolutely no reason, it starts to become comical. You're like, all right, I see he's doing his job, and his job is to yell at me to try to stress me out. I can either choose to not be stressed out, or I can let this get to me. And so I think I learned a lot of, even though I don't know that I contextualized them, I kind of had these lessons in the back of my head going into Force Recon and then into the Raiders. It was just like really, really, really hard, physical training and much shorter duration. I mean, boot camp is 8 or 9 weeks. The selection process is much shorter. So there, it's really about, and it's much more, I'd say, mentally demanding. You've got to be on your game physically. But they're watching everything that you do. So they're watching your interaction with other candidates. They're watching your, what are you going to do when you think nobody's looking? There's a lot of gauging your commitment to the organization, to the mission, your why, trying to find out why is this person doing this thing. So I don't know, it would be hard to equate, I certainly would not have been prepared for the second one had I not been through the first one. I think that's an absolute fact.
And writing a book is a hard thing in a very different way.
It is. Sometimes I say it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And like I said, I've been shot at, I've jumped out of airplanes at night at 30,000 feet. Writing a book is fucking hard.
I want to hear more about like your journey as a writer, but what was hard about it, or what was the hardest thing about it? Or
a couple of one, doing it while you're, working a full-time job with a family and everything. It's tough. You've got to be committed to it. I'm not the kind of person that, a lot of writers will say, you've got to write every day. I'm not that kind of guy. So I would try to at least make sure I'm interacting with it every day, as reading or editing or thinking about it or kind of plotting, things out, diagramming or whatever. But I'm not the kind of person that can just walk in, sit down at my desk and start writing. I've kind of have to, and I've learned that, I forget who said it, but a writer said that I only write when the muse strikes, but luckily she strikes at 9 every morning when I sit down at my desk. So I think I'm trying to be more that way. I mean, you put your butt in the seat, Stephen Pressfield talks a lot about that. Yeah. Like you put your butt in the seat and start writing, and you accustom yourself to that, just like you accustom your feet to rucking or your shoulders to rucking. But, it's that part of it's hard. The decision to like sit down and say, hey, I'm going to tell these stories, talk about my life is challenging, right? Both from the aspect that, like I said, we're kind of supposed to be silent professionals, from the aspect that I really, really hope I don't do a poor job of this. I hope I don't misrepresent things. I've never been, I'm trying to, I've been for the last couple of years, but I'm not the kind of guy who kept a diary, or a journal. And so I had to check with a lot of people and kind of make sure that I had a lot of the times and timelines and things like that accurate. I was really nervous that I would, screw something up or say something that wasn't true and leave myself open to somebody to come back and be like, that never happened. Yeah, you're full of shit. So there was certainly that. And then I think probably every third person you talk to is like, yeah, I'm going to write a book someday, or I want to write a book, so there's coming out and just being the person that says, yeah, I'm in the process of writing a book takes a form of courage, I think, and then actually slogging through the process, trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher, trying to do all of those things is not, a user-friendly process. So there's a lot of places along the way where it would be easy to just say, you know what, screw it. It's not worth it. Or I'll write this for my kids. They can read it someday. But again, it comes back to, I've done harder things than this before. I can do this. I can, finish it on the timeline. I can send it to people to read. I can, and now I think it's that kind of tenacity is hopefully, I think, paying dividends with this. Like, I'm a guy that, was a grunt, know nothing about social media or marketing or any of these things. But like I said, I will work fucking harder than anybody else. All right. So my agent, that's what I'm always telling them. Yeah. The publisher I have, tell me what to do, man. Don't think that it's going to be too hard or, you're going to tell me, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm like, pile stuff on me, man, pile podcasts on me, pile articles to write on me, appearances, public, speaks, whatever it is, man. Commit to, I think that's absolutely a trait that the military builds. And I think the further you go in the military, I, we kind of just like, I'll do whatever it takes to be successful at whatever it is that I commit to doing. So I think that's absolutely a trait that I have the Marine Corps to thank for.
Well, I mean, I would imagine that based on that description, there are some agents who are going to send their authors for re-education through rucking. I want to know too, is there an element of the physical endurance? There's something I read that John Krakauer said about, that because he's a like pretty accomplished climber, and he's like, if I can shiver on a ledge for like 36 hours during a storm, I can sit at my desk all day long and write and have like not just the mental focus, but I can have the physical stamina to keep sitting. And did you find that to be the case with the actual act of writing?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote most of this book between like 4 and 5 in the morning, like every morning. That was in order to get it done. I'm at my best in the morning. Coming home from work, I'm not, I'm not good for a lot of creative work at that time. So I'm like, hey, the only way that I can do this and continue to make sure I get my physical fitness in, and that's kind of non-negotiable. So I'm gonna have to get up at 4, and I'll write for an hour. And, I'll come home at night and edit, I could do that, but just chip away at it. And I tried a lot of different things, but, one of the things that I did that I found helpful was I got it from somewhere. I'm not sure where, but, if you're going to write a 300-page book, take, 2 cups, 1 cup with 300 pennies or paper clips in it. And you just, hey, I paid the rent today, 1 page, move 1 penny from 1 cup to the next, and get up the next day and do it again. And so I would make a page a day had to happen when I sat down to really write. Weekends it ought to be more than that. That, like I said, there would be sometimes I go for a week just kind of stuck. I'm not not adding a new word, but going back and deleting and editing and throwing away 20 pages that were garbage. So it's a lot of, it requires a lot of resilience. I think it requires, in memoir, a willingness to, stare very hard in the mirror, and be brutally honest with yourself. Because nobody wants to read a book that's like, hey, I'm super awesome. Every day I was super awesome. Right? So you've got to, show all the moles on the warts. And you've got to, one of the things that scared me was just, like I said, just making sure that I'm not misrepresenting things, so kind of making sure that I'm telling the truth and accurately portraying, all of the amazing 99 other guys, that I worked with. So that was, really important to me.
Yeah, it's so funny how that works, and that's something that has come up on this podcast before, that the things you do to try to make yourself look good oftentimes make you look vain and arrogant and full of shit, and then the things you do to reveal your flaws make you relatable and likable. And
yeah, exactly, and that's not lost on me at all. But I've learned in life that you get a lot further by being, self-effacing and not taking yourself too seriously.
What was your experience like with the MFA? How did that go? What did you learn, and what were you hoping to get out of that going into it?
Man, that probably is scared me a lot more than getting shot at.
Really?
So yeah. So I was 43, 44 years old. I was this former special operations guy showing up and joining an MFA program with people who were, I considered real writers. I remember one of the first classes that I was in said that, the professor said something, and I was like, well, real writers probably do this or do that. And one of the, 27-year-old kid in the class with like acne on his face was like, hey, we are real writers. And to me, I was like, I thought he was talking about everybody else. I'm like, oh, so this guy's like, we're real writers. You're a piece of shit. So I was, I came to, I learned so much from that opportunity, from being with people from wildly different walks of life. A lot of them had, were older, but I was by far the oldest, I think. But people who had successful careers, a lot in publishing, or who had a lot of things published. One of the guys started the program with a book deal already. He had an agent already, and was just writing his novel and got it published shortly thereafter. So there was just a wild. And my flaw is grammar and punctuation. There was a lot of things I would turn in, and I would use Grammarly, I would use whatever, but come back with red marks on them in places where they shouldn't be. I mean, most of my fellow students were English majors, right, and they're undergrads. So I had the Marine Corps is kind of like a storytelling university, right? So I had my PhD in storytelling and shit talking, right? So it was really just kind of learning how to tell the stories, how to put them on paper, how to, and then, eventually I had to learn, where semicolons go and things like that.
Is it fair to say, this is just an observation from the outside, but it seems to me the military, but particularly infantry, is like the last bastion of just amusing yourselves through storytelling, and that like kind of that is maybe oftentimes the sole form of entertainment or distraction.
Absolutely. I think it's certainly one of the last bastions where almost anything goes in storytelling. I mean, absolutely, things that are not PC or I mean, wouldn't even register on any PC meter. When you live day in and day out with in the mud and when you're tired, wet, cold, hungry with a group of people, thrive on hardship and adversity and being pissed off. And plus it's such an eclectic group. You'll have the Philly guy with the accent. You'll have the Texas guy. There's always a Texas guy, right? There's the guy from the Midwest who's naive and rube or whatever, and you've always got this cast of characters that there's always at least a handful of them that are just gifted storytellers. So I think there's a lot of lessons in storytelling that are learned from just sitting around campfires or sitting around drinking beer. There's so many insanely funny things that happen, things that you would not, the kind of stories that if you would tell them to a civilian friend, they like, that didn't happen. You're full of shit. All right. That could never, ever happen. You're like, dude, that was a Tuesday night. That happens once a week, that somebody gets thrown off the second floor of the barracks because they drank too much or whatever the story is. I definitely think it's the oral tradition, and I'm sure it exists in other places, but it's largely been done away with. Because we're all on our phones or we're listening to headphones but the infantry, because you're out in the field in a fighting hall for hours on end, for weeks on end, you're sitting on a ship, with limited connectivity for 6 months on end, or you're out in the middle of the jungle or the desert. You've got to do something to entertain yourself, and they get really, really good at it.
Suppose you were to give like a lecture on storytelling lessons from the Marine Corps for public consumption, civilians. What's your big takeaway or takeaways from that we all could learn from that culture of storytelling?
Well, the first rule is to never let the truth get in the way of a good story. That's kind of a universal Marine Corps rule, right? You don't let the truth get in the way of the good story. And I think a lot of times that kind of broader applicability in storytelling, particularly when we're telling stories that, if you go back to the first people, if I came in and said, oh, hey, don't eat those red berries because they're not good for you. Versus if I walked into the cave and said, hey, he went up, man, he grabbed one of those big red berries and he ate it. And then he started blood started coming out of his eyes and this happened and that, which are you going to remember? You're definitely going to remember the story. So, I think we've been a storytelling people forever. That's how we've passed on traditions and history and everything. So I think there's massive value in storytelling. One of the lessons that I've learned in now, kind of doing podcasts a lot more, I have a tendency, if I'm not careful, to ramble, to not stay on topic.
Same.
I value listening to somebody who's really, really good at telling stories, and I try to learn from them, even now, I would love to be, that's why I think I'm a better writer, because, I can go through and delete a lot. I just recently read, supposedly what David Letterman would tell his guests. He would say, hey, show up with two either really funny or really interesting stories, tell them and go home. So that's been the advice that I've tried to take on is kind of think of what I want to talk about, make sure I stay on the topic. But the more detail, I mean, just with writing, the more detail that you can put in the story, how did things, feel and taste and smell and sound, you not only, engage all the senses. Now, that's I think one of the real values in not just the military, but in any kind of skill learning, right? If you can engage more senses, people are going to be more likely to learn. I was just reading an article on Substack. They were talking about most people, probably, younger than me, I could start throwing out questions about Harry Potter, a spell that Harry Potter or this or that, the names of, and nobody ever taught you that. You read it and it was interesting and you learned it, right? There was repetition because you saw the spells multiple times, so, the ability to tell good stories is, I think, what makes us human. And I think it's what will continue to kind of drives culture. It drives our traditions and history. And that's history and traditions are huge in the Marine Corps, especially huge in the military. And I think that's definitely another one of the reasons that it is probably more prevalent there than in some other places.
I remember my dad telling me that Bazelon died because he tried to win the Medal of Honor twice. And like that has that strange like a cautionary berry tale that that's probably not like technically true, but that was his take.
Yeah. And that's I think the people that are most successful at telling stories, and it's a skill that I, really have been trying to work on is, if you can distill something down into an analogy, into a metaphor, then the people are going to remember it and it's going to come across better. So or just distill it down into a golden nugget. That's a huge lesson being taught by saying that. Don't try to win the Medal of Honor twice. So I think there's, people who can do that well, are generally better leaders, right? Because they can get their point across more quickly. And we love learning through stories. We love hearing an analogy and being able to connect the dots.
Well, John, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. It was great hearing your stories, and I really am looking forward to the book. And I wish you a very happy launch week. It's going to be, I hope you savor it because it will probably be a manic few days.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up on sleep and get ready for it because I'm sure it'll be a wild ride. But I had a great time. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and I will send you some pictures of the view from my ruck in
Please do.
southwest of Ireland.
Awesome.
If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailypros.com or on LinkedIn. My links and John's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.